Good morning, Year 8. Welcome again to another lesson from history. Mr. Pop has made a voiceover PowerPoint which is amazing, but I'm me. So thank you, Mr. Pop, for changing my work and making it so much more accessible. Huge props to Mr. Pop. But of course, I'm going to make a video because I get excited about this topic and I can't help myself. So sorry, Year 8, you're getting something that is different, but hopefully will lead to the same outcome. Anyway, so yeah, let's talk about this. You might have noticed, and I hope you have, that we're living in a global pandemic. And you might have noticed that that requires people to stay safe. And you might have noticed that we're publishing data about where is worst and how many people are dying and where they are dying and why they are dying. And that this data appears on maps and it's often coloured in so you can see where and when things are occurring. And you'll say, sir, that seems a rather portentous way of opening a lesson. Also, yeah, obviously, that's how we keep ourselves safe. I mean, duh, when didn't they do this? Ah, says I. That's what history is all about. So, we're living in a global pandemic. I'm going to take you back to another pandemic, another major disease, another epidemic. Except the difference was people had literally no idea how it spread. And I'm going to do that by moving on to this photograph. Now this photograph on the, wait, you're looking at this on the left of the screen, so it's that way, on the left of the screen over there, it's that way, is a photograph from Leeds. Of course it's from Leeds, I keep going on about Leeds, and you remember Leeds from when we were talking about living conditions 2 lessons ago, 2 weeks ago. And we're going to talk about what that meant for those people that lived there, because we talked about what it was like, we talked about how many people shared a toilet, we talked about all the potential problems that brought with it. And we're going to look at Bluebell Fold. Bluebell Fold is one of the poorest areas of Leeds. It's right next to the River Aire, that's A-I-R-E, and that's the main river that flows through Leeds. It is a yard, or cul-de-sac, or dead end, however you want to refer to this, with 20 families living around it. Now, there are 20 family dwellings. That means there are single rooms or cellars, or rooms up to 2 stories high. And the yard itself is reasonably small. You remember that picture from London 2 lessons ago, with all those people stood in the garden of what looked like a very small house, and you realise just how many families lived there, because it was 1 person from each dwelling. Well, this is similar. And the person we're looking at is that child in the middle. Now, this was taken a year before the events that I'm about to relate took place. In this picture, the child is 1 year old. When the child was 2, on the 26th of May, 1832, the child began to vomit and have diarrhoea. Diarrhoea is liquid poo, sorry. And as the child progressed, within a few hours, the skin had turned a black-blue colour and was cold to the touch. With mounting horror, family and neighbours gathered round and watched as the child struggled for breath and then died. Over the next few months, 700 people in Leeds died the same way. Don't write this one down, but the question is this. Why did the child in Bluebell Fold die? You've heard the symptoms. What did it? Now, if you're playing along, you'll have paused the video. I've given you enough time to pause. Let's move on. What's the answer? It's cholera. C-H-O-L-E-R-A. Cholera. Cholera is an awful disease. It kills 50% of its victims in a matter of hours. And the way you go is pretty nasty, as I've described. I don't do this to shock. I do this to show what we're talking about. In many ways, it's similar to what we're living through today. The difference is, today, we know how coronavirus spreads. We know it's not fully airborne, but it's spread through droplets in your breath. That's why we wear face coverings when we go out. That's where we try and keep 2 meters distance. It's about how far the droplet can travel without hitting you. So it's about 1 meter, I think. So 2 meters is better because then there's no chance of getting hit by droplets, especially if you're talking or shouting or coughing that spread the droplets further. 2 meters is a rough guide and reasonably accurate as a way of staying far enough away. People say, oh yes, it's based on old science. Yes, it is based on old science, and old science still holds up. With face coverings, it's even more effective. If you're both wearing face coverings, it's even more effective again. And that's why we wear face coverings, and it's why we're told to maintain social distancing. And that's what all that's about. This disease, cholera, well, it was different. Here's the title I want you to write in your books. How did cholera affect the people of Britain? There's the title. So write it in your books, rule off under the last piece of work, write that title down, underline it please, make it neat. It may take more than 1 line. You know how history titles work. They're a question, they take a bit of time. In the left-hand margin, after you've written the title comes first, write the date. And it should stay in the left-hand margin, so don't bother writing down Wednesday. We know it's a Wednesday. And just write down the date. The date today, by the way, is the 20th, so it's 20/1/21. Careful now. It's a new year. So that's the day. Underline that too, please. And then we're going to do a standard thing. Now remember how history questions work. I will talk you through these. It's the class work. There is a homework. Don't worry, it's not very long. And you'll submit these as normal to, talk through and just check. So I'll do my standard thing. Don't worry about it. You'll notice there are 4 tasks, but they do what we do in history. They start easy, and then they get progressively harder. Furthermore, they start going through with source material. And again, I've talked about this. If it tells you to use a source, you must use the source it tells you to use. You are allowed to use any other sources to help, but you must use at least, oh, that was an interesting noise, you must use at least the source that you're asked to use. So the first task says, read source A. Oh, hang on, where's source A? Oh, there it is. Source A. No one in Britain had seen it before when it came to Europe for the first time in 1830. The British government was so scared it tried to stop ships entering Britain so that the disease couldn't spread. But the ship owners didn't listen. And the government, and the bit that's not there, decided to let the ship owners in anyway because it made money for large shipping magnates. Sounds familiar. In November 1831, the first person in Britain died from cholera in Sunderland. Sunderland, by the way, is up on the east coast. It's near Newcastle, which is about as far as Geordie as I go, and was a major port at the time, and a major port with Europe. By 1832, it had spread all over Britain, leaving 31,000 people dead. 700 of those in Leeds. Now, that's some modern historian. Why can we trust modern historians? Pause if you want to think about it before answering. I'm going to assume you paused and yelled out answers and annoyed your family. Please annoy your family. Bring someone along to punish when we go through these things. It's fun that way. But yes, why can we trust modern historians? Because, well, they're reading all the sources from the time. They've researched it. We can be reasonably certain that what they're saying is reliable. Is it useful to us? Well, it depends on the question. Let's have a look at the questions. What disease arrived in Britain in 1830? Well, it should say 1831, but what disease had arrived there? That should be obvious. Yeah, it's cholera, but write in full sentences. Don't write out the question, just write in full sentences. So if you're writing down a single word answer, you've read, write a full sentence. The disease that arrived in Britain in 1831 was cholera. There you go. Question B. How many deaths did it cause in total? So you start, this disease caused deaths in total in 1832. Again, I'm not going to give you the answer. You can read. Question 2. Read source B. Oh, hang on. Source B. The following are the symptoms of the disease: giddiness, sick stomach, slow or weak pulse, cramp at the top of the fingers and the toes. This is followed by vomiting and diarrhea. The lips, face, neck, hands and feet turn blue, purple and black. The skin is deadly cold and often damp. In the treatment of this disease, no specific remedy has yet been discovered, nor has any cure been successful. But the greatest confidence can be expressed in the doctors of this country who will surely find a way to treat the disease. This is from a report on cholera in a local newspaper in Sunderland, October 1831. It says 1931 there. I do apologise. It should say 1831. That's my fault. Mr. Pop had changed it, and then I used the other source because I couldn't make the animations work. Sorry, Mr. Pop. Your hard work has been in vain. So it should say 1831. It will by the time you see it. So, A, why do you think people feared cholera? And for this, you can probably use your own experiences in a current pandemic. You've read or heard reports like that yourselves. I'm thinking mainly of what we call the symptoms, what it looks like to have the disease. These are terrifying, much like COVID. And again, I don't wish to worry you or alarm you. But you know how people report on things like this. So here's a step removed, if you will. Why do you think people were so scared of it? And hopefully that makes a lot of sense to you. The second question, again, answer in full sentences. People were so scared of cholera because, or people feared cholera because, and then use the information. You can quote directly or you can paraphrase, whatever works best for you. The next question asks you, what's the purpose of this source? Or rather, it says, why do you think this article was published? We call this the purpose. To what end? What was the writer hoping to achieve by making this source? So not like, oh, there was a cholera pandemic, so they wrote about it. Yeah, I know. That's called motive. That's the why, if you will. We're talking about purpose. What was it supposed to do? Why was it written? So it's written to warn people. But how? And it's written to reassure people. But how? And you might come up with your own purpose as well. They're the two that I would pick, but I'm sure there's a third lurking in there. Question 3. Read source C. Hang on. Source C. A description of the River Aire, remember, near Bluebell Fold, the main source of drinking water for the entire city of Leeds, and this was in 1841. 9 years after the child in Bluebell Fold died. Into the river flow the contents of about 200 water closets. Toilets to thee and me, and similar places. A great number of common drains, they're those things running down the centre of streets we saw 2 lessons ago. The draining from slaughterhouses, chemical soap, gas, dung, dye houses and factories, pig manure, and all sorts of rotting animals. And this is where people get their drinking water. I'm just going to leave that hanging, because what else do I say to that? This explains why my great aunt, for example, used to have a thing whereby she let water settle when she poured it out of the tap. She grew up in Preston on one of these yards in the 1930s when they hadn't yet fixed all the problems. And so what she used to do was pour the water in a glass, and then she put the water on the side and wait. And I never understood why she did it. She was a great aunt. She was a sister of my grandmother. And I never got that. And great aunt Audrey, in case you're wondering. And the reason was, well, stuff like this. When you got water from the river, it's full of all this stuff. And then you leave it to settle, and it's called distilling. And you end up with a layer at the bottom of all the dirt, then another layer of sort of scummy stuff, and then a layer of scum on the top that you take off with a knife, and then you drink the clean water from on top of all that guff. Lovely. Question 3. People caught cholera by drinking contaminated, we mean dirty, water. Why do you think the working class were the main victims of cholera? Why is it that poor people are most likely to die of drinking water that is contaminated? Use the source, source C, and your own knowledge from the last lessons to help you explain your answer. So think about those living conditions we talked about 2 lessons ago before the navies. Think about what the cities were like. Can I give you any more help? I will in a moment. The last question, so yes, use details, link with quotes, and link to what you know, and be as full as you can. When I say explain, you need to write a point, you need to give evidence, you need to explain by linking back to the question. This meant that is a beautiful sequence of words that will help you explain. So, point, Mr. Atkinson is being really annoying right now because he just showed us sources D&E and he's still yammering on. I can prove this because I have seen the video where he did exactly that. This makes him really annoying because I want to get on with the work. Do you see? You make a point, you give evidence, you explain by linking back to the question that you're being asked. Look at sources D&E. You should do that twice for question 3. Look at sources D&E. Do you think people at the time knew where the disease came from? Well, source D is called the silent highwayman. Your Money or Your Life, and was published in 1858. In the background, you can see St. Paul's Cathedral. Hang on, if I can get my mouse to work, I will show you where. There it is. There's St. Paul's Cathedral, there's London Bridge. We're in London. This is the River Thames. And he is on a boat on the river with dead stuff in it, and this skeleton is covered in a cowl. Who is this skeleton? Yeah, it's Death. Well done. So Death rides on the water like a highwayman, like someone holding you up. Your money or your life. This is published in a magazine for rich people, middle-class people, who pay taxes and don't want to pay for better water supplies for people that aren't rich. And it's saying, it'll come and get you. The death, the cholera on the water is coming to get you unless you clean up the river and pay for it. And yes, it's like a mugging, but it's a mugging by death. So you pay off Death because, well, you can't exactly lock him up. Source E is supposed to be a funny cartoon, also for the middle-class people, pointing out that poor people, and you can tell they're poor because the clothes they're wearing, get this. It's called Death's Dispensary. And there's Death, with a crown on, King Death, pumping water from a water pump that they're all having to drink because there's no other option. Now down here, it says, gratis, from the parish council. Water for free. People that couldn't afford to pay for their own piping had to use free water. This is in 1866. This is 34 years after that child in Bluebell Fold died. And they're still dying of cholera. Do you think people at the time knew where the disease came from? Well, it appears they did by 1866. They had an idea in 1858. But they certainly didn't know in 1832. Those two sources give you roughly when they figured it out. But hang on a minute, what changed? I've been talking about how I'm going to link it to today, and below me, there's an image, there's a map, and you're like, so you literally haven't spoken about that map, it's just randomly there? Ah, well spotted. Source F. Bluebell Fold is in one of the poorest areas of Victorian Leeds, next to the River Aire. Information from a modern historian. Me. You'll notice none of the questions ask you to use Source F. Literally none of them. Which question does it help with the most? Yeah, it's question 3. Don't worry, I'm almost done. So if you want to pause the video at this point and go away and answer those questions, that makes perfect sense. It'll take you, I reckon, there's 4 questions. It'll take you about 20-25 minutes to get through those questions and to answer them in full. So go pause now and do those questions. I think that's long enough for you to have paused the video. If I'm babbling now and you still haven't paused, pause and do those questions. If you've done them, excellent, well done. Submit them either by taking a photograph or, well, actually, yeah, by taking a photograph. You should be writing them out by hand. It's easier than trying to type them up. And frankly, you need time away from the computer as much as possible. I recognise you still have to use the worksheet somehow, but ideally, you're not staring at the screen the whole time or trying to type on that screen. So hopefully, you've found a way of doing this away from a computer or at least away from other people. Or unless you're trying to punish people by forcing them to watch this video and then they've come back. Welcome, people. Your children have forced you to be punished by. Wait, what? So, here's the last bit. Because the question actually asked, how did it affect the people of Britain? And so far, we've focused mainly on what cholera was and how it's dealt with. And we've learned that at some point, people actually worked out what was causing it. So here is a subheading, another title, if you will. John Snow and the Broad Street Pump, 1854. Put that on the left-hand side of your work. The left-hand side of your work. On your book, and make sure you've underlined it, make it neat and tidy, because you're going to answer the question below here. It says, using the video clips, the diagram above, and today's lesson, explain how Dr. John Snow proved that cholera was a waterborne disease. Not airborne, but in the water. How did they know by 1858 and 1866 exactly what was causing the disease, and how didn't they know in 1832? Now, there are 2 video clips that I've included here. Whoops-a-daisy. 2 video clips that I've included. This second one here is a History Channel documentary of 8 minutes and 18 seconds in length. It's reasonably good, but it's not my preferred one. This one at the top here is one of my favourites, and that is the Map Men episode. Be careful, there's an advert midway through, and at the end there is also an advert. You don't have to watch those. It's a comedy show, kinda, but it does actually show very, very easily and neatly exactly what occurred. Now, this one I rather like. It's comedy. You might have noticed I like my jokes. This one is much more scientific and historical. This one is around about 5 minutes in length, and this one is 8 minutes in length. You can watch both. Having watched both, and having done the class work, I would ask you to spend no more than about, I'd say about 15 minutes really, to try and answer that question. Why 15 minutes? Because there's 3 paragraphs I'd like you to ask. I reckon you can come up with 3 ways in which Jon Snow proved his point. There's the map, there's the research, and there's a third thing. And each one of those things that he did helped prove a point. And you've got to work out what the 3 things were and write a peel paragraph on each. Now don't worry, if you only write 2 peel paragraphs, that's perfectly acceptable, but you should be striving for 3. That's why I give you 15 minutes. This is kind of the homework in as much as it's the work to understand. So if you don't have time in this hour, that is perfectly acceptable. Put it aside and do it later. But do it. I'll put a separate task for that on Show My Homework. This task, the class task, will be pink, and the separate task with that particular homework, or whatever you want to call it, will be green, and it will have a separate thing. I hope that this video has been helpful. I hope it hasn't been too long, and I hope it hasn't been too stressful in terms of workload, but also in terms of subject content. It's pretty difficult. I'm hoping by being removed, it's allowed us to make more sense of things and to answer a pretty important question in history as well. Thank you very much if you have been for watching. Thank you very much all those of you that have been brought along by your children to join them in this weird world. And I look forward to seeing you all in the next lesson, which may well be a Teams lesson. Thank you very much. Have a lovely day, Year 8. See you around.